Let's look at the 6-string rooted C minor pentatonic scale. Now the pentatonic scale is just like the blues scale, but you're not playing that sharp 4 or the flat 5. So you have 5 notes, hence the name pentatonic, and it lays into a 2-note per string scale form, which is going to be ideal for visualizing these double stops. If you look at example 2, you'll see the C minor pentatonic scale. And I really encourage you to memorize these scale degrees because the shapes are going to be the same no matter what key you're in, and hence the scale degrees will always remain the same. They're great points of reference for chords, for leads, for everything. And obviously this is the scale that everybody learns first and uses the most. It's your first choice. If you look at example 3, you'll see how I've color-coded what I term the low side and the high side of this 2-note per string scale form. We're using black numbers for the low side. So if you look straight across in the 8th fret, you have root, 4th, flat 7, flat 3rd, 5th, and then root. And then in the 11th and 10th frets, you have the flatted 3rd, the 5th, the root, the 4th, the flatted 7th, and the flatted 3rd. Now I've color-coded this so you can quickly and easily see what I'm going to play. By double stops, we're going to play adjacent strings, 2 notes simultaneously. So in the terms that I use, I would visualize it like this. High, high, which means the flat 7 and the flatted 3rd, which is the high side of both the 2nd and 1st strings respectively. Now on the right hand, you have a lot of options on this. You could strum these double stops because they're on adjacent strings, so it's a straightforward approach. You could hybrid pick, which means you use the pick on the lower string and your middle finger on the higher pitched string. You could just finger pick it with your middle and ring fingers, and if you were just finger picking, you could use the thumb and index finger, any combination thereof. So the purposes in this lesson, I'm demonstrating things on the fretting hand, so I'll be using a lot of hybrid picking because you'll see how it enables me to keep the rhythm things going that are plectrum oriented and throw in these double stops. And then later on when we start skipping strings, you can't just strum them. So we're going to hybrid pick. Simplicity wise, I'll use the pick and the middle finger on all these double stops because we'll be at a slow tempo. So let's just play along here. I want you to play right along with me, and I'm going to give you some technical tips. Now, the first 2 notes you're going to play here, the flatted 7th and the flatted 3rd, you notice how I'm hyperextending or bending backward the DIP joint, the last joint on my 4th finger of my fretting hand. I don't recommend you play this with your hand wrapped around like this and that finger curled, because that's going to cause you some problems later on. So if you're not accustomed to this, which most people aren't, you're going to have to kick your wrist a little bit under toward the front of the guitar, underneath the neck, and make sure you reach over and you keep this little finger hyperextended. See how I call it a little ski slope, just like you're coming down a ski slope. So this little finger middle joint will be up above the strings. And that way I can hyperextend this, and that also keeps my other fingers available so I'm not back like this trying to reach things and hitting other strings that I don't want. So that was what we call the high-high of the 2nd and 1st strings. And then you simply go according to the diagram. See how I'm on the black side, the low side of the pentatonic scale. So here we have double stops. Little theory, those are perfect 4th intervals. Each of those notes are 5 frets apart. Okay, then we go over to the 3rd and 2nd strings. Now this is where the shape changes. So you'll notice how you'll have 2 places where you don't have the notes occurring in the same fret of the adjacent strings. So for our purposes, we'll use the 3rd and the 4th fingers. Now you see, I'm not having to move my hand because I have my knuckles parallel with the bottom of the fingerboard, the edge of the fingerboard. Whereas if I'm going to run into problems with my fingers all flat, and it just causes a lot of problems. So anyway, your hand's underneath there, and your question is probably going to be, what if I want to bend? Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. Then you have the low side of the 3rd and 2nd strings. Then we're going to move over to the 3rd and 4th strings. Now you have some fingering options. I like to use the 3rd and the 4th fingers because they fit in really well, and it also allows you to get some really nice vibrato, and you don't run into this problem. Now you can play these double stops with your 3rd finger barred, hyperextended. Now I'm not barring down flat because I don't want to sound that 2nd string. If you're running a relatively flat fingerboard radius, low action, light strings, you can actually have a ghost hammer on when you come in to play that C and F, that root and 4th, you might accidentally sound the A that's occurring over on the 2nd string. And if you get your hand out like that, it gets awkward. So experiment with both fingerings. I'm actually going to discuss fingerings in just a moment. And then you'll just walk down, index finger's going to keep playing anytime you have notes on the low side because that's always a straight line. Then we go over to the 5th and 4th strings. There I am playing it with my 3rd finger, but I would prefer the tips of my 3rd and 4th finger. Back down, and you can see how I'm not just barring in the sense we did with the first lesson. We were doing all the slurs. Your hands around, more in a halfway between your rock blues approach where you thumb around and halfway from a bar chord position. Then another situation where the notes are not in the same fret. Now it's getting muddy. You know, this sound is pretty muddy anyway. So down the low register, you're going to have to be careful. We won't be using the double stops on the 6th and 5th strings as much as the other ones, simply because they're low in register. So play along with me right now, nice and slow. That's a little bit dry, so we need to make these things come to life. So if I play some single note line, now it doesn't sound like an exercise. You got to get the notes under your fingers, but let's talk about how to make some sounds with this. You have to be able to put a vibrato on these things, and it's a little different posture than what you're accustomed to when you're just fingering a single note. If you're doing a single note vibrato with your index finger, you're on the corner of your index finger. Well, this is going to tear up your finger when you want to play a double stop on 2 strings. If you're not used to it, it'll really rip up the side of your finger, but your finger is going to be inclined and rolled over so that you're not playing on the flat part of your hand, of your finger. You're more on the side of your finger. That gets the bone involved. So let's go through and do some exercises where you're vibrating the low side of the 6th-string root C minor pentatonic scale. Now obviously I've got to go up, so I'm blocking the other strings with my pick and the side of my thumb. Then I go 2nd and 3rd strings, 3rd and 4th. It's a little muddy, so let's clean it up. Let's go to the high side. You see here, you're using your 3rd and your 4th fingers, reinforced with your 2nd finger, dampen with your 1st. Now if you use the 3rd and the 4th fingers there, that's how it's going to look and sound. You might have your 2nd finger down, you might dampen, you might even have all of them down, whatever's comfortable. But also practice playing it with just your 3rd finger. Now, I'm a dampening fanatic, so when I'm playing on the 3rd and the 4th strings, for example, you can see how I'm blocking the 2nd and 1st strings with my ring and pinky, respectively. And then immediately after I play those, I'm blocking. Any of you who have seen my videos know I'm always explaining this dampening technique. It actually comes from playing slide guitar. So the only strings that can ring are the 2 that I want, or whatever the case may be. That'll pay off later on. We start throwing in some punctuations with hybrid picking. All right, so in this lesson, before we go to the next lesson, I want you to get comfortable just playing these double stops. But in closing, let's apply some slurs in these. Now I have the gain so I can have a lot of sustain. Because if you just practice them like the exercise, where we went, where's the music? Remember when I demonstrated the next level where I played some licks, threw them in? I'm not just going to stay in position. I'm going to throw in some of these slides. You got to get those slides in there. So practice all of the different fingerings. Here are some of the fingerings you might explore. I can play a double stop with any of my 4 fingers in a bar posture. I could play it with my 1st and 2nd fingers, 2nd and 3rd, 3rd and 4th. Now the 3rd and 4th fit real well because your little finger's a lot smaller than all the rest of them, and they just fit comfortably in there. And also the angle of hand works great. And it also allows you to always move up to the high side of the pentatonic and then access the low side because your 1st finger's free. So hopefully this gives you some ideas. Experiment with all the different fingerings, practice hopping and skipping strings. When I started planning for this lesson, the Big Blues lesson, I thought about tabbing out some specific examples for you, but I'm not going to do that because I want to teach you these concepts, and you should be familiar with the C blues scale enough that you can come up with some great ideas on your own.